Yo, what is going on, guys? It is Boy Nick here, back again with a brand new video today. So if you guys saw my review that I did for What If Season 2 the other day, you guys know that in that video I said that I was going to do a review of the new Echo series on Disney+. I initially planned to have it out this past Sunday, but I ended up getting a last-minute vaccine appointment the day before, and as many of you could imagine, I was really feeling the vaccine settle in, and so I didn't have the energy to record or edit the video. But it's now Monday, and I feel much better than I did on Saturday and Sunday. And so because of that, I'm now going to film my review for the new MCU Disney Plus show, Echo. And so before I actually go into the review for Echo, I wanted to say that this is a show that I was highly anticipating, because if you guys saw my review that I did for Hawkeye last year, you guys know that I really loved that show. It's arguably my favorite MCU Disney Plus show. That and Loki Season 2. The two are neck and neck for me. But one of my favorite aspects of Hawkeye was the Echo character. I loved Alaqua Cox as that character, and I could not wait to see what the Echo show is going to bring. The show surprised me a lot, despite the fact that I had a lot of expectations for it. And with that, we're just going to go straight into what I thought about the show. So, first off, I want to say that Alaqua Cox is definitely the standout of the show. I absolutely loved her in this role. I think that they got an actress who fit the role perfectly. And they actually got an actress to play the character who is deaf, indigenous, and an amputee, so it wasn't typecast whatsoever. They actually got an actor to fit the character, and it was an excellent choice, and Alaqua Cox really gives a great performance in the show. Like, honestly, it is kind of interesting to critique someone's acting for someone who doesn't do line delivery, at least vocally. So whenever I was looking at Alaqua Cox's performance, I was looking more so at her mannerisms, her facial expressions, if she could sign kind of with emotion in the way that she uses her arms and her mouth and all that. I basically just went off all the physical aspects of acting as opposed to vocal stuff, since she doesn't vocalize in her performance. And again, like, she did an excellent job. She had great facial expressions. She signed with a lot of flair. I felt like she signed with emotions and a lot of just oomph. So I thought Alaqua Cox did an excellent job in the show. They found a deaf actress who's also indigenous and an amputee, which fits the character perfectly. And they also found one who actually was able to pull off all the visible acting very, very well. So, Alaqua Cox's performance, chef's kiss. And on that note of her character, I was happy that we got to see more of her backstory in this show. And I like the fact that they got Alaqua Cox's real-life cousin to play the younger version of Echo in both this show and the scenes in Hawkeye. I always wondered if the little girl who played young Echo was related to Alaqua Cox, because they have very similar features. So the fact that they got her cousin to play her I think is really cool. And the cousin in real life is not actually deaf, but she did learn sign language for the role, which I think is awesome. I think it's really cool that Marvel did that. And as I said, the show is really about her backstory, so the show is really more of a character study than anything else. And that is where I start to get a little bit conflicted on the show, because my expectations for the show was that I thought it was going to be far more action-packed like Hawkeye was. And instead what we got was a character study. Now, I'm not going to sit here and complain about that, because it's actually a very well-made character study. But because my expectations were more action-packed, I can't help but feel like my expectations were set too high. But regardless of what my expectations were, I'm not going to critique the show on what my expectations were, because it makes sense to do that. I'm just going to critique it based on what it actually is. And what Echo is just a pretty well-made character study. So even though the story is not really what I anticipated at all, I really appreciated the story for what it was. And I think, honestly, it wasn't quite what I thought it was going to be, but I still thought it was solid enough, and I really enjoyed the character study aspect of the show. So I still enjoyed the show for what it was, even if it was not as action-packed as I hope it would be. But even with the lack of action, I have written down the fight sequence in episode 1 where Daredevil makes an appearance was really badass, and it was overall just freaking awesome. I thought that even before Daredevil showed up in the fight, I thought that it just overall had excellent camera work and choreography. I don't know who the team they brought in to do all the stunts and the choreography and the camera work, but they brought in an excellent team who did a phenomenal job with that action sequence. It was so great to look at. I actually remember thinking to myself, this is going to be a very action-packed show. And then the rest of the episodes were not as action-packed. But for a show that didn't have a lot of action, I was really impressed with the one really awesome action sequence back in episode 1. There were some minor action sequences in the other episodes, but none of them hit as hard as that first action sequence. And we finally got to see Daredevil be a badass in the MCU, which I thought was really cool. So before I actually continue on that stuff, because I do want to talk about the Daredevil stuff a little bit, when it comes to the Defender Saga side of the MCU, I've only seen season 1 of Daredevil, and I've seen a little bit of Jessica Jones. I've not seen the rest of it, but I am planning on finishing up what I've seen of Jessica Jones, as well as watching the other shows, because what I've seen so far I've loved, and I'm really impressed by it. And I definitely want to finish all those before Daredevil Born Again comes out at some point later this year. But on that note, I like the fact that this show tied into the Daredevil show without you needing to actually know the story of that show. You can watch this show and not know anything about Daredevil or any of those characters and be like, that's kind of interesting. I think I'm going to go back and watch Daredevil and the Defender Saga side of the MCU now, just to see what it's about, which I think is honestly really cool. It's very much like what they did with Daredevil's appearances in Spider-Man No Way Home and She-Hulk, as well as Fisk's appearance in Hawkeye. It's just really cool to have these characters come out in MCU shows where they don't actually give you a whole lot of plot details of the pre-existing show, and it instead entices the audience who maybe hasn't seen it to go check it out. And it's definitely a marketing plan to get people excited about Daredevil Born Again, which they are going to have to know the backstory of for that. But it's kind of a very smart and intriguing way to get people invested in that side of the MCU and to get invested in these characters for the upcoming project, which I think is kind of smart. And as I was saying, though, like, it's cool that we finally got to see Daredevil be a badass, because in No Way Home, we saw Daredevil as Matt Murdock. So we saw his lawyer stuff, and in the No Way Home More Fun edition, we got to see even more lawyer work. We did get to see him catch the brick, which was pretty awesome. And we saw Daredevil come back in She-Hulk, and he had some great dialogue with Tatiana Maslany in that show. And we got to see him in that suit, and we got to see him do some stuff that I thought was pretty funny. The Daredevil stuff in She-Hulk was tasteful, but we didn't get to see Daredevil be a badass. And in this show, we actually got to see Daredevil come out in a suit that was similar to the one from the Netflix show, and we actually got to see him fight and do awesome choreography and stunt work. So this time, like, we really got to see the badass, like, R-rated side of Daredevil, which I think is a great step forward for the more darker side of the MCU. And speaking of Daredevil, Wilson Fisk is here, and he's great. Vincent D'Onofrio is still great as his character. I respected his performance a lot in the first season I saw of Daredevil. I thought he really brought a lot of vulnerability as well as scariness to that character, and it was great to see him in Hawkeye. And I also really liked seeing the relationship that he has with Maya Lopez in the show, and it was really intriguing to see the history between these two characters, and it was really well explored by the writers. There's some issues that I have with the show, but I thought the overall character study aspect of the show, about learning more about Maya and her ties to Kingpin, I thought was really well explored, so I gotta give the writers props for that. And I think the show definitely benefited from being a TVMA rating. They didn't take as many risks as I thought they would, but there was more blood shown than usual, which honestly surprised me a lot. And I think that even though the show didn't take as many risks as I felt they could have, I think it's honestly a decent enough start for a more darker side of the MCU. Like, I thought Multiverse of Madness actually took a fair amount of risks with the amount of blood and gore they were showing, and this one had some more blood, and it had some more like angsty kind of stuff, so it's not super dark yet, like we're probably going to see with Daredevil Born Again or Deadpool 3, but I think it's honestly a solid enough start to a dark side of the MCU. And the other thing I want to talk about is, as many of you know, with the TVMA rating and the more amount of blood than usual, this show is not for kids. So if you guys have any kids out there who love the MCU, don't show them the show. One, because it's got some content that might not go over very well with them, it might disturb them a little bit, but ignoring that, I think kids are going to find the show really boring. Because when you take your kids to go see a Marvel movie, they go to watch superheroes fight, and they go to see them punch the villains in the face, and they have these awesome battles and stuff. I don't think any of your kids are going to want to sit through a character study. So I'm just letting y'all know straight ahead if any of y'all have kids who you might want to show this show to. Although I will say, though, I did see some videos and some stuff online about people who have kids that are amputees or who are deaf or have indigenous ethnicity or ancestry, or however you say that. Then I saw that there were some parents who showed this show to their kids for that kind of representation. I think that's pretty awesome. I will give them credit for that. If you want to show this show to kids for representation's sake, I think that's probably a good idea, but like, just know what your kids are getting into before you show them this show if you decide to. And we got to see a darker side of the MCU this time with Echo's backstory, which I thought was really cool. And I wish I kind of did wish they took more risks. However, the risks they took, I thought that the extent they took them to was actually good enough, and I like the fact that they didn't overdo those risks. So those are all the stuff I really liked about Echo, but I do have a list of flaws, so I am going to go through those. But just, just because I have flaws with the show, that doesn't mean that I don't like the show. Or even, like, some of these flaws are just, like, personal things that don't necessarily affect it objectively. But with that being said, I'm just going to go into some things I thought didn't work as well for the show. My main issue with the show is that it does have some pacing issues, and that's mainly due to the fact that we learned about Maya's family in the show, which I liked seeing those in the flashbacks, but they didn't necessarily do as much as they could have with those characters, because I thought, like, when we learned about them in the flashbacks, it was really interesting. When it came down to what they were doing in the present, they didn't really amount to much. And so because we spent a decent amount of time in the show learning about the backstory of Maya and her family, and seeing what it led up to in the present, and the present didn't honestly lead up to much, it did kind of feel like we took a little bit of a detour. It reminded me of Miss Marvel a little bit. I liked the Miss Marvel show a lot, and I loved the character, but we did kind of learn some more about Kamala's backstory of her family, And it was interesting stuff, but it didn't feel like it contributed a whole lot to the ending of the show, and I felt like it could have been reserved for a second season or something like that, so it did feel like it took a little bit of a detour to get back to the main plot, and it kind of feels the same way here in Echo. I liked the fact that we got to learn about Maya's family, and I like the fact that they're still here in the present, but because it didn't amount to a whole lot, it did kind of feel like we spent a decent amount of time on something that didn't contribute to the ending a lot, and I think honestly it would have been better just saving this side of Maya's story for either season 2 or for Daredevil Born Again or for whatever project she comes out for in the future. So I think it's honestly an interesting introduction to some interesting stuff, but didn't amount to a whole lot. So that's kind of my big complaint with the show is we had a detour-ish side of the show that kind of threw the pacing off a little bit. We might see more of Maya's family in the future though, and if we do, I'd be okay with that because I think that they could honestly do more with this family than we actually got in the show. So another thing I have written down the flaws, this is more just like a personal opinion, this isn't an objective flaw with the show, is that it didn't meet my expectations like I said earlier in the video, but I still thought it was a very good show for what it was, and so for what the show is, which is a character study, I thought it was very good, but because it didn't meet my expectations, that's not an objective flaw, but it's kind of thing where it does kind of hold back the entertainment a little bit for me personally. However, if you had no expectations and saw it for what it was, it might not bother you that much. So that's just a little personal thing. And I was, however, happy with the fact that they released the 5 episodes all together, and I like the fact that they didn't, have like a ridiculous amount of episodes, so it didn't feel like a super convoluted show or anything like that. And I like the fact that they put the show out all together because I think had you put the episodes out week by week, it would have been a very bad marketing plan for the MCU because people would have seen the first episode and been like, wow, that's awesome, and seen the rest of the episodes and been like, that's not what we were expecting based off the first episode, and it would have come off as extremely anticlimactic. So I think the fact that they just put the whole thing out at once definitely was a good step in the right direction marketing-wise and fan-wise and critic-wise. That way people can just get straight into it and be like, okay, I see what they were going for, as opposed to building up anticipation week after week to see what could come next and then have that expectation not be met. But then on the note about the 5 episodes being put out, I'm not entirely sure if the season would have benefited from having more or less episodes because part of me feels like it could have benefited from having more episodes, that way we could have done more with Maya's family, but part of me feels like it could have benefited from having 1 or 2 less episodes, being like a little mini-series, because of they don't do very much with Maya's family. So I honestly don't know if it would have been better had there been more episodes or less episodes, but it feels like going one way or the other could have helped the show a little bit more. So it's a flaw that I'm not entirely sure how to feel about, but it is what it is. Another flaw. So I'm going to talk about the ending a little bit, but I'm not going to spoil it. I did like the ending despite a lot of people not liking it, but my issue with it wasn't even so much that it was anticlimactic like people were saying it was. The pacing that led up to it was kind of off, like I said earlier, and so because of the pacing not being that great in the second and third episode of the show, when we got to the finale in episode 5, it felt somewhat underwhelming because the pacing kind of threw it off a little bit. So I wasn't necessarily underwhelmed because I felt like they could have done more. I was underwhelmed because we spent so much time, or spent a decent amount of time focusing on stuff that didn't amount to a whole lot. Then when we got to the stuff that did mean a whole lot, I kind of felt like, we could have maybe fleshed this, had we not spent this amount of time focusing on Maya's family, so we could have spent more time focusing on the main story a little bit more, that way the ending feels more fleshed out and earned, if that makes any sense. So that's kind of my big issue with the ending. I didn't think the ending was bad at all, but it was a little bit underwhelming because of the pacing. I felt like we could have done a little bit more with certain things, so that's my opinion on that. Overall, I thought Echo was a pretty solid show, even though it was very different from what I expected it to be. And, I didn't necessarily love it like I hoped it would, and it wasn't quite as good as I hoped it would be, but I still thought for what it was solid enough. I think, even though it's not an excellent Disney Plus show, I still think it's a mostly pretty great Disney Plus show. And I think it's honestly in about the same echelon as the stuff that we were getting prior to She-Hulk, so I think that says enough about the quality. For an overall rating, I'm going to give Echo an overall rating of an 8.5 out of 10. A mostly pretty entertaining show, minus some of the pacing issues and minus some of the expectations not being met. And I'm going to give it a grade of an A- because it is overall very well made. But again, it's got some issues that are holding it back from having a higher grade. So that's my opinion on that. Not quite as good as I hoped it would be, but overall still pretty enjoyable. I liked it enough. It's not as good as Loki Season 2. It's not even as good as What If Season 2. So I'm slightly disappointed about that, but it's still better than Secret Invasion, so I'll give it that. So before I end the video, I decided that if I were going to rank the Disney Plus shows, it would go in this order so you get an idea of where Echo is. So number 1, I actually have 2 shows. I have Hawkeye and Loki Season 2. Both shows are so great it's hard for me to pick one, but those 2 shows are neck and neck. Then I would go WandaVision, which I think is excellent, but I do have a couple issues with the way the show ended. And then we have Moon Knight, which I thought was a great show, but I felt like there were certain things that could have been fleshed out more, and I'm waiting to see if we're going to get a Season 2. And then we have What If Season 2, which I thought was very, very good. A big step up from What If Season 1. Then we got Miss Marvel, which for me was a show that I thought was a lot of fun. Had some, detour kind of issues, but was a fun show. Then we got Loki Season 1, which I thought was a great season, but it was kind of cliffhangery, so, it really got paid off in Loki Season 2, which is already at the top, so you know that. And then, number 7 is where I would put Echo. And those were interesting because number 8 is where I have Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And honestly, Falcon and the Winter Soldier and Echo are kind of like interchangeable for me a little bit. Shows I think are very, very good and that I had high expectations for, but they weren't exactly met. And so they're good for what they are because the expectations were not met entirely. They're kind of like neck and neck a little bit too. Although at this moment in time, I think I like Echo slightly more than Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Then after Falcon and the Winter Soldier would be What If Season 1, which was great, but Season 2 is much better. Then number 10, by a long shot, is Secret Invasion, which I liked most of, but didn't care for the ending. And then last place is She-Hulk, because She-Hulk started off pretty fun, and I was disappointed by the ending, so there's that. And I'm not even going to include I Am Groot, because is that even necessarily a show? I don't know, with that whole ranking out the way, I hope you guys enjoyed this review. I'm sorry if it was longer than I meant for it to be. I did kind of go on a tangent in some spots, so I hope that I can edit the video down to a decent runtime. But this video is going to come out on Wednesday, so I hope you guys had enough time to see the show by now. And if you have any comments to make about the show, if you have any opinions that you want to let me know about, leave them down in the comments below. Although leave a spoiler warning, as this was a spoiler-free review, so just let me know what you guys think about this show. I'm really interested in seeing what y'all's opinions are. Some of y'all might have liked it more than me, and some of y'all might have liked it less than me. I don't know, but I want to know what y'all's opinions on the show are, since they are kind of mixed right now. But that's going to be it for the video, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Make sure to leave a comment down below letting me know what you think. If you want to support the channel, please make sure to hit the like button, as it really helps out. And if you want to support the channel even more, feel free to subscribe, hit the notification bell to get notified about my latest videos. Guys, thank you so much as always for watching. I really appreciate all the support I've been getting recently. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!